Ladies and gentlemen, we will not let the interruption at the start eat into the question time, so we'll extend the event by about 15 minutes to ensure that everyone has a chance to ask questions. I'm going to be asking a couple of questions first. So, Corey, when was America great?
7 days ago. You know, it's an interesting question. Because as you look at the history of our young country, at the turn of the 1900s, America really came into her own. We saw luminaries like Andrew Rockefeller and Carnegie building America to what we know it is today. We also saw great despair and poverty. But there was hope. And I think the difference now, our country is founded as a country of immigrants. And I think there's a portion of the American people who don't have hope anymore. So if we can make it great, and what that means is giving people the opportunities that are outlined in our Constitution. It's hard to do, but there's a path forward.
I mean, you describe hope sort of in the early 20th century and even the 19th century. I don't think there was much hope for African Americans who were segregated, enslaved before 1862. It seems to be that this hope you describe in the Great America was restricted to a very, very small number of people.
Well, there's no question that our country has gone through some difficult times. And look, it's less than 100 years ago, women didn't have the right to vote. And in 2016, we saw the first female candidate as a major party to potentially be the President of the United States. It's amazing what 100 years can do. And let's hope that in the next 100 years, we see much more of that. You have to remember, 8 years we've had an African American president. Most people couldn't have envisioned that in their lifetime. We've come so far, and having a female as a Democrat nominee is a step in the right direction, but it's not enough.
But do you not see some inconsistency in you're talking about us coming far, but also telling us that we should go back?
No, what we need to do is we need to give people the opportunity to be successful. You know what we need? We need to have a city that's safe to walk down the streets and not get shot in. We've got more deaths in the city of Chicago in this year. In the last 5 years, this is a true fact, in the last 5 years, more Americans have been killed in the city of Chicago than in 15 years in fighting in Afghanistan. Did you hear what I just said? More Americans have been killed in the city of Chicago in the last 5 years than 15 years of soldiers fighting in Afghanistan.
How many of those were by the police force?
How many were from black-on-black violence? The plurality. It's disgusting. One violence, one death is one too many. And you know what we need to do? We need to make it so that if your family isn't a celebrity, you should still be able to go and walk down the street with your child and not get shot.
Gun control.
You know what we need to do? We need to understand that the job of the government, first and foremost, is to protect their citizens. And the day that we fail to do that, we fail as a country. And I believe that.
A gentleman shouted out gun control over there, and yes, it's very, very perverse that we should compare a war zone to streets, but when there's heavy artillery fire on streets, it's kind of to be expected. Do we not just need to get rid of these heavy-duty weapons that young men and young women are wielding, possibly when they're, mentally ill, possibly when they're unstable? It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Look, the problem is this. The problem is not gun control. Look, I live in the state of New Hampshire. I don't know if you've ever been to the state of New Hampshire. I would say 8 out of 10 residents have a gun. I can walk down to my local store all day long and not fear of being shot. Chicago has one of the most restrictive gun laws in the entire nation, as does New York City, as does Washington, D.C. And if you look at the crime in those cities, and specifically, go look at the city of Baltimore. Baltimore, Maryland. 9% increase in homicides this year because of gun violence. Exceptionally restrictive gun laws. Passing more laws and saying you can't own a gun is not the solution, because people find a way to do things. Look, there are a whole bunch of laws that say you can't do drugs. Guess what? People do this all day long. There are laws that say you can't drive your car greater than 65 miles an hour. People do it all day long. Passing more laws is not the solution.
But, Corey,
dealing with the mental health issue is a problem.
That's a different matter. Are you telling me that there isn't a correlation between gun violence and people owning guns?
Yes. Yes, what I'm telling you is the illegal guns are killing people.
Illegal guns are killing people, and so are legal guns. But to move away from gun control, you're of Polish descent, you're wearing a badge that shows that. Doesn't the highly charged anti-immigration message of Trump's campaign make you a hypocrite? Or should your ancestors have been barred from entering the country, or worse, deported when they were there?
Well, look, immigration, let's talk about it. This is a very important topic. I believe, and I'm a U.S. citizen, it is the highest honor and privilege that our country can bestow upon somebody is to become a citizen of our great country. Now, you may disagree, and that's okay. But if we don't understand who's coming into our country, then we are doing a disservice to our citizens. So let's talk about who's coming into the country. Hillary Clinton's proposal was to increase Syrian refugees into our country by 550%. We have no ability to conduct a background check on these people. Let me give you one example.
Did your ancestors have background checks?
Well, let me give you one example. Today in modern society, there was a woman who came into our country on a K-1 visa. And if you don't know what a K-1 visa is, it means she met an American. She decided to come into the country. She settled in a small community called San Bernardino, California. And what the State Department did in their infinite wisdom, because they're exceptionally overworked, is they refused to check her social media activity. Now, she came into the country legally, no question about it. But you know what her social media activity said, which they refused to check? I will commit jihad against the United States. You know what she did? She converted her husband. They killed 17 people in San Bernardino in one of the greatest massacres in our country's history. And she came into the country legally because our country didn't do a thorough job of vetting people. First and foremost, let me say, it is a privilege to become a citizen of the United States. It's a high privilege and an honor. And there is a system to do that. And if we don't have a system in place that we can make sure we know who is coming in, then we need to take a step back and we need to make sure that not one terrorist, not one potential terrorist is let into our country. Because if they kill one American, it's one too many.
Is there not a difference between putting in policy that ensures you know how many people are coming in and having rhetoric which accuses immigrants of being rapists and being criminals?
Well, it's factual. Look, you can say it's not factual, but I can point to the Steinle family. Okay, maybe you don't know them. I've had the unfortunate privilege of meeting them, and the Jamil Shah family, and Sabim's family, and all the other families of victims from illegal immigrants who came and killed their family members. You know, the Jamil Shah family is an African-American who is a great man. He had a good boy who was 17 years old, and he was about to go to Stanford University on a football scholarship from the inner city in California. And walking home one day from football camp, a illegal alien who had been caught, arrested, released from prison, drove up and shot him 3 times in the face, killing him instantly in front of his own stoop. For no apparent reason, there was no altercation. That individual had been deported 3 times. The individual who was an illegal immigrant who came to California and shot Kate Steinle in the pier in California had been deported 5 times. One individual coming in and killing one American is one too many. And if there can be a system in place, whether that's a physical barrier like a wall or a better background check that prevents that from happening, it is the obligation of the United States to protect her citizens.
Okay, let's move away from these isolated cases. And I'd like to talk about the...
Well, look, it's only isolated if it's not your family. So if you want to go through the statistics, I'll be happy to go through this.
Of course, listen, Corey, one death is indeed too many, but we've spent the first half talking about how much black-on-black violence you see in Chicago, Americans killing each other, and we spent the second half talking about other people coming and killing people. Yes, people kill people, but you know, it seems to be you select from some atrocious crimes committed by some immigrants to conclusions which are very, very dangerous. Building a wall, that's not to deal with a single issue of somebody killing somebody. It seems to be that you have a racist agenda which you're justifying with selective cases. Is that a fair claim?
So let me read you some statistics. So let's go through the statistics. This is the U.S. Senate Immigration Subcommittee dated June 22nd, 2016. Between 9/11 and the end of 2014, at least 380 foreign-born individuals were convicted in terror cases inside the United States. There are at least 2 million convicted criminals alone right now living inside the country, according to the Center for Immigration Studies. The current immigration policy costs taxpayers about $300 billion a year. In the last 5 years, we've admitted 100,000 immigrants from Iraq and Afghanistan, and in these two countries, according to Pew Research, a majority of residents say that their barbaric practices of honor killings against women are often or sometimes justified. From 2008 to 2014, nearly 13,000 criminal aliens were released back into the U.S. We can go on. Nearly 1 million illegal immigrants, including nearly 200,000 with criminal convictions, have been ordered deported but remain in the United States. And between 2013 and 2015, the Obama administration released over 86,000 criminal aliens from custody. In 2015 alone, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement freed 19,723 criminal aliens who had 64,197 convictions among them. These are not isolated incidents. Those include 8,234 violent convictions and moreover 208 homicides.
Let's move away from extraterrestrial life.
No, this is real.
I think the audience might come back to it. I want to talk about something different.
But this is real. These aren't isolated incidents.
I understand that. But I don't have these
homicide convictions.
I don't have these statistics in front of me, so I'd like to move on.
I'll be happy to share them with you.
We can talk about it after. Why did Donald Trump make you his campaign manager when every election that you've been part of has resulted in defeat? Is it because Trump's plan was never to win?
Well, first you're wrong, because if you look at my election with the Nay campaign, which I was his campaign manager,
I can tell you specifically what campaigns I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you were an undergraduate and you were a right-on candidate. I'm talking about when you were campaign manager for a senator that was the first senator to lose a primary to another Republican.
How about when I was the campaign manager to the congressman from Ohio? Do you have that one down?
So I'm talking about 3 you've lost. I'd say essentially,
that's not 3.
If you've won
how about when I was the Northeast political director for the Republican National Committee and won 70 races?
If you have lost a campaign as a campaign manager and as a candidate for treasurer in your own state,
okay, that's a fair
why did Donald Trump, who's a winner, choose you who's possibly a loser?
That's great. Let me ask you a question. Has anybody ever heard of James Carville? Anybody ever heard that name? Who is he? Anybody? Whose campaign? Who? President Bill Clinton, right? He ran the campaign. What did James Carville do prior to running Bill Clinton's campaign? Any idea? He was a 40-year-old unemployed hack. What does he do today? You say he's one of the greatest political operatives in the history of the country. What did Ed Rollins do before running the re-election campaign of Ronald Reagan? What did Jim Baker do before running the 1980 re-election campaign, election campaign for President Reagan?
I think the emphasis of my question is not so much on your own personal life, but on whether Trump actually ever anticipated winning. Was Trump's nomination not just a PR stunt that went a bit too far?
Look, I think what you have is, look, if Robbie Mook was sitting here, who's a good man, he'd be saying, why did you run the worst campaign in the history of politics? I think what you should be saying is, you ran the greatest campaign in the history of politics because we won. That's the difference. And you can go from 0 to hero very quickly.
Thank you. I have one more question before we open up to the audience. You told us a very cute little story about a little boy taken up in a helicopter. But has Donald Trump not done to the American public exactly what he did to that little boy and fed a fantastical lie? Batman is now going to be in the White House.
Yeah, see?
Batman doesn't exist.
See, what Donald Trump did is something that nobody would do. He told you the truth. And what he said was, I'm going to look at NATO. And if other countries don't pay their fair share, I'm going to renegotiate that, or the United States will rethink our participation in NATO. And Donald Trump said, I'm not going to cut entitlements for people who are owed that obligation to the government. I'm going to invest more money in infrastructure. I'm going to cut taxes. And the people said, and I'm going to renegotiate bad trade deals. I'm going to look at the TPP. I'm going to look at the North American Free Trade Agreement. I'm going to bring jobs back to the country, and for a change, we're going to put America first. And there's a sense of pride as an American. It's nice to be put first sometimes. And I know you don't like that, and I know you think that's isolationism. But I would think that whatever country you're from, you want that country to be putting you first and your residents first. And I think what Donald Trump has said was, the United States will not take a second seat to anybody anymore, and we will be a leader again in this world. And what we see is that the American people have now sent a mandate to Washington, not just with the election of Donald Trump by historic Electoral College numbers, but by returning a Republican majority to the House and the Senate. And they said, we want to see a change. And now we've got 4 years to see if that change can happen.
Let's go to the audience. From Ben.
No questions, huh? So
wait for the microphone to get to you, the one standing up.
You said you wanted to discuss his agenda. So since winning the Electoral College, Trump has said that rather than build a wall, it will be partially a fence, with Newt Gingrich calling it a campaign device likely to be paid for by the USA. Rather than imprison crooked Hillary, he says he will not be looking for a special prosecutor. And rather than drain the swamp, he has hired chairman of the RNC, Reince Priebus, as his chief of staff, along with the white nationalist Bannon of Breitbart News. So my question to you is, how do you have so little self-respect that you can stand here and defend a candidate who is not only a bigot, but a liar who doesn't have the courtesy to follow through?
Well, the good news is I'm seated doing that, so I don't have to stand, so I appreciate that. But look, here's what it comes down to. Mexico will pay for the wall, and it's very simple. You can believe it, you cannot believe it. President-elect Trump went down and met with the president of Mexico, and they had a nice conversation. And if you look at the value of the peso right now, they're very concerned about their relationship with the United States. Because the economic indicators know that the wall that Mexico has on their southern border, which keeps people out from coming into their country, is now going to be placed on the northern border. And what happens when that happens? And criminal aliens who are living in this country are going to be deported back to the countries they're from. When that happens, Mexico's in big trouble. Their economy's going to collapse, and they're scared to death to do that. And so what they're going to do is they're going to say, we're going to do whatever you want us to do.
That sounds like blackmail,
sure.
Corey. That sounds like blackmail.
It's called America First. It's called protecting our people.
There's a woman on the end of the row, straight ahead of me, I think.
So you made a comparison to Happy Gilmore, but I feel like that falls out because Happy Gilmore wasn't a belligerent racist. And I would ask you how you liked all these individual stories of families that were ruined by immigrants, but what about the families that now face these racists that feel validated by Trump's campaign and the campaign that was run on hatred?
So let's go through the numbers. Let's go through the numbers of what the exit polls said. There was this notion that Donald Trump is a racist. That's what you've articulated on numerous occasions. That's what the mainstream media wants to tell you because that's a very sexy story. But the numbers don't bear that out. If you look at the exit poll, Donald Trump received 8 to 9% of the African American vote, which you may say is not a lot, except when you look at it contextually. John McCain received 4% of the African American vote. Mitt Romney received 6% of the African American vote. So as you look as a percentage of the electorate, Donald Trump received a higher percentage of the black vote than either of those two candidates, and neither one of them were called a racist. Now, I don't speak for the black community, nor do I think they're a monolithic entity, but I think that if you look at the percentage of black voters who supported Donald Trump in this election is higher, statistically higher as a percentage than either of the last two Republican candidates, none of which were called a racist. So let's go to the Latino vote. And everybody said that Donald Trump hates Latinos. The fact is, not only does he employ thousands of them, but Donald Trump received 29% of the Latino vote, which again is higher than the percentage of Latino votes that either Mitt Romney or John McCain got. So if you want to make a gross accusation, please use your facts to back it up because the numbers indicate that is not the case. And as a matter of fact, the minorities, particularly Latinos and African Americans, turned out and supported Donald Trump at greater proportions and greater percentages than any candidate in the last 16 years.
So I think the question was more nuanced than that. It wasn't simply Donald Trump's a racist. It was Donald Trump has galvanized white nationalist groups in America like no candidate has before and refused to disavow their endorsements. Is it not the case that the real hardcore racists, who we all acknowledge to be racist, are now at a level of confidence that they've never been before, putting minority communities in jeopardy?
Look, Donald Trump has said very publicly he didn't want the support of David Duke, and I think if you're going to hold people who support Donald Trump, if you're going to hold him accountable for the people that support him, then I think the same needs to be true with Hillary Clinton. And we could go through the number of groups and organizations that support Hillary Clinton that nobody on the left is talking about. And so, look, you know what the problem is in this election? It's not about racism. Just look at the numbers. Hillary Clinton lost the young vote. She actually won it by 18 points. Barack Obama won it by 24 points in 2012 and by 34 points in 2008. Donald Trump won older voters by 9 points, 53-45. College whites by 4 points over Hillary Clinton. Non-college whites, 67-28. He won it by 38 points. It's not a racism issue. It's an issue of the electorate has said, we want somebody different. And if you look at every demographic, the black vote, the Hispanic vote, the white non-Hispanic vote, where Donald Trump wins 58-37 over Hillary Clinton. Look. That's not how the election's designed, right? So the system is what the system is, and you got to play by the rules. Now, you want to change the rules, I'll be happy to change those, but that's not what the rules are. The rules are you need to win electoral votes. Because what we know is that, for the most part, a Democrat is going to carry the states of California and New York by serious majorities, basically all but not allowing a Republican to win the popular vote. Now, if you want to change the rules and it's strictly a popular vote issue, then we'll be happy to have that discussion and that Congress can discuss that. But right now, the rules are what the rules are, and Donald Trump won more electoral votes than necessary to become the President of the United States by a wide margin. And just, you got to remember the biased media. The day of the election, the Huffington Post reported that Hillary Clinton, the Huffington Post, the liberal Huffington Post reported that Hillary Clinton was 97.5% certain to be elected President of the United States that day. No accountability. Mea culpa is what they said the next day. I guess we called it wrong. As did every other media outlet, because they didn't want to see what was happening, except the Investor's Business Daily poll, which showed consistently the race exceptionally close, and Donald Trump ultimately winning.
Another question, please. Let's go to this side. There's a person I'm pointing at there with the sort of teeth over your lips in enthusiasm. Yeah, just no, Julian to the right. Yeah, there we go.
Hi. Before you became famous for talking over people on CNN, arguably your most famous moment was allegedly assaulting a reporter. Also, Donald Trump had a moment where he talked about grabbing women's pussies. And so I'm just wondering, is it okay for the President of the United States and his former campaign manager to treat women this way?
It's a great question. And I think if you're familiar with the Zapruder film, it's the film that they used to see who assassinated John F. Kennedy. And that film is now second in the lexicon of the most film ever watched, next to my supposed assault of this particular reporter. And if you look at what happened that particular evening, and you listen to the audio, it was a room like this where people were filing out. And my exact statement was, "Excuse me, thank you," as I walked past a person who had ended up inside a security bubble of the U.S. Secret Service. There was no assault. You know what assault is defined as? An unprivileged contact. And if that's what assault is, someone would have moved forward with that case. And what the Democrat prosecutor said was, we have no interest in moving forward with this case. So as it relates to me, if you've touched the person next to you this evening, they could be filing assault charges, and maybe they should, or maybe they shouldn't. But that's how the system works in the United States. And what we saw was that justice ran its course. And I think, candidly, it was an unfortunate incident, but not one that is reflective of my life in any way, shape, or form. As it relates to Donald Trump, he's addressed this issue and apologized if people were offended by that. It's something that he has spoken about. And the American people have responded, particularly women, who Donald Trump won, actually lost, but lost at a smaller percentage than what Mitt Romney lost women by in the last election. Because they don't care, because they want hope, and they want something different, and they saw that in Donald Trump.
Irrespective, I think America probably needs to sort out its locker rooms. If we go to the waving hand on the far left.
So, before you mentioned that Donald Trump election is a great hope. And what I'm asking you is, what Donald Trump election can represent as a hope for millennials and the younger generation? Because you call for unity, but what I see is that there is a big difference between opinions of 50, 60 years old people, men and women, and the opinions that most 20, 30 years old people have. So, what can be done in the future to reunite the generations? This is my question.
It's a very good question. And, the concern is the apathy of the younger generation. I don't mean that in a pejorative way, it's just factually accurate. Older people vote at a higher percentage than younger people do. And people understand that. Now, maybe they'll make the voting process easier and they'll allow online voting, or they'll allow mail-in voting in more locations and more people will participate. And I hope everybody participates in the process. But right now, young people are much more transient than older people, right? They change their residences, they move much more frequently because they haven't established a career in a particular location yet. So I think what Donald Trump needs to do is, look, again, Barack Obama did a very good job of reaching out to the younger generation, particularly in his first election where he won by 34 percentage points over John McCain. But what I think you have to do is you have to innovate, right? You have to give people job opportunities. You have to give people the opportunity that when they come out of college and have a significant amount of debt because of the education that they've then gone through, there has to be a job waiting for them on the other side. And I think the way that this administration will do that is by reducing the amount of regulations on companies so they actually have the ability to grow. And that's what fosters growth. And I think, look, the numbers bear out the fact that young people did not support Hillary Clinton in the same level that they supported Barack Obama in either of his last two elections. And basically, Hillary Clinton is 69 years old and Donald Trump is 70 years old. So it wasn't an age issue. It was literally an issue of what they can do for hope moving forward. And so I think it's incumbent on the president to create jobs so that young people are more involved. And look, if you don't like them, 59 million people didn't vote for Donald Trump. There's an opportunity to change. There's an opportunity to hold him accountable. There's an opportunity to keep Congress accountable, and I think everyone needs to do that.
Thanks. We'll take a couple more questions. Let's go to the end of the second row. Yes.
Just first, in response to one of the earlier questions, it's just worth pointing out that using Donald Trump's share of the national vote or the composition of their employee register is not a sufficient defense as an accusation when the accusation is whether or not someone is a racist or an enabler of racists. It's the moral equivalent of saying, I have a black doctor and that means I'm not racist. On the point of morality, the question I wanted to ask is, what is your line in the sand? What would it take from a candidate for president that you were the campaign manager for you to resign?
Well, I think there's a couple factors. One, I think before you take a job as a campaign manager for a candidate of the President of the United States, you should have done your homework and understood actually what you're getting into. And I'd love to say I knew what I was getting into at the time, but I don't think I actually did. So I'm a little negligent on that. 2, look, anytime a potential crime would be committed, I couldn't be privy to that. I couldn't be part of that. If I knew that my candidate was doing something that was illegal, and I allowed that to continue, or I allowed myself to stay on board knowing that that was taking place, I just couldn't do that. And then I also think that, you know, it becomes very difficult sometimes when you work extremely closely with somebody to see all of their faults because you want to see the good. And look, David Axelrod is a good friend of mine who helped run the Obama campaign, and Paul Begala, who helped run the Clinton campaign, very good friends of mine. There are things with every candidate that you both agree and disagree with. And I think you have to look at the totality of it. But I think for me, once I make a decision to sign on with a candidate, I'm willing to put all of my resources, all of my efforts, all of my skills to work for that individual on the condition that there is nothing illegal that takes place, because I just couldn't bring myself to be part of that.
You go to the woman over there. Yeah.
Thank you. 98% of climate scientists agree that global warming is happening, it's real, and that we are on a course, if we don't change action, to actually not just damage this planet, but put life on this planet at risk. And so not being a climate scientist yourself, and Donald Trump not being a climate scientist, what's your justification for not believing that or not taking it on board in the policies that your campaign promoted, and therefore literally gambling our whole world?
So our campaign did not spend a lot of time focusing on the issue of climate. It wasn't an issue that was candidly at the forefront of the American electorate this cycle. For right or wrong or indifferent, it just wasn't. And let me be clear, I don't speak for Donald Trump, I speak for Corey Lewandowski. But having been in the private sector and having the opportunity to have worked with the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, which is the government agency which is tasked with looking at these types of issues, and having the opportunity to speak to some of the government experts out of Boulder, Colorado, which is where this is actually housed inside the federal government, I can only tell you that the experts that I have talked to inside the federal government, not in academia, have not provided me compelling evidence that this is happening. Now, you can tell me that Al Gore has the movie out that shows the polar ice cap is melting and polar bears aren't going to survive up there anymore, and maybe that's the case, and Al Gore won a Nobel Prize or sold Al Jazeera, did something, made a lot of money, and grew a beard. I don't know what he did, but it doesn't matter to me. I think there are a lot of issues with our country and with our world. And if climate change is the most important issue, I think that's important, but I think what's important to this administration is making sure that we don't have a nuclear holocaust because some terrorist and rogue place in the Middle East gets a hold of nuclear materials or weapons-grade plutonium because we did a bad deal and decides to launch into the neighbors next door and have an unimaginable impact. And if that means that climate change occurs, and we'll deal with that, but I think a nuclear war is much more significant.
Let me take one more question. Let's go to the person waving at me at the back. Red jumper, yeah.
Mr. Lewandowski, you got a man that you've reminded us many people said had no chance to become the Republican nominee and eventually get elected. You must be an intelligent man.
I love this question. I don't know what he's going to say, but I love this guy.
You must be an intelligent man, but I find that statement increasingly hard to defend the more I hear you speak. But I want I want you to tell all of us here in this room that you honestly subscribe, as an intelligent man, to the idea that Donald Trump has said so many times to these rallies, these thousands of people that you describe, that global warming, a subject that he and you know nothing about, a subject that climate scientists will forget more about in their lifetime than you will ever know.
I hope so.
That climate change is an invention by the Chinese government to destroy American manufacturing, that somehow economically benefits only them and not Americans. Do you honestly believe that?
Look, I like the front half of that question more than the last half, I'll tell you. Look, if you want to share with me some compelling data that is not coming out of a left-wing liberal institution or a liberal media professor, I'll be happy to look at it. But let me tell you this. I think, I'm unfamiliar with your PhD academic skills in this particular field, so please forgive me. But let me say this. This is not the single biggest issue facing our country. And it's not the single biggest issue facing America today. And it may be your single biggest issue, but if this was an issue, then the American electorate would have been talking about it for the last 18 months, and they have not uttered one word about it. And so what I believe is that the American people want jobs, and they want safety and security. What I believe doesn't matter. I'm not the president-elect of the United States.
But can we have a yes or no? Do you believe?
Do I believe it's a scam? Yes, I do.
So you don't believe in global warming? It's a no then?
I do not believe in global warming.
Okay, there we go. He's answered the question. Ladies and gentlemen, please. It's imperative that you remain seated whilst we leave for security reasons. But first, please join me in thanking Corey Lewandowski for being part of this event.